Hello, and welcome to the 2019 Human Resources Virtual Event, Emerging Talent Strategies for the Transformative Workforce. My name is Alex Colasano with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to thank Workday and Deloitte for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Workday and Deloitte. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's virtual event. You can follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum and be sure to join our LinkedIn group, HR Forum. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. We have a sampling of upcoming HR leadership forums that may be of interest to you. In September, we'll be in New York, October, Dallas, and in November, San Francisco. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up today during today's event in the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we've set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Michael Stefan, U.S. and Global HR Transformation Leader, Deloitte Consulting, LLP. We are pleased to have Michael with us to deliver opening remarks. Welcome, Michael, and over to you.
Thank you, Alex, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our session today. I'm really excited to share some insights with you on our global human capital trends, and then after about 20 minutes of some highlights of the trends, to transition over to a panel discussion with our great esteemed guests who are going to offer up some fantastic perspective. It's a little hard to try and summarize a year's worth of research and over 11,000 responses in 20 minutes, but what I'd like to do is really call out some of the critical elements of what we found in this year's report and some of the key steps that you all could take or areas that you could start to think about as it relates to your individual organizations. For those of you that are familiar with the Human Capital Trends Report, you might recall that last year the name of the report was The Rise of the Social Enterprise. And the first piece of information I'm here to share with you is that the rise of the social enterprise is indeed here to stay. The macro forces that gave rise to the social enterprise over a year ago continue to grow stronger in the market. But being a social enterprise is a recognition that organizations can't just operate in a siloed fashion with their own four walls anymore, that it's way too visible for the external environment, and it's too important to engage all of those different forces and understand not only the implications that they're going to have on your organizations inside the four walls, but what role that you can play in creating an impact for not just for your workforce, but also for those outside of your organization in the overall ecosystem. So if you are not engaging with your external ecosystem and managing everything you do, the risk is that your message, frankly, will fall flat. Last year's framework had two dimensions. One was moving from an enterprise focus to an ecosystem focus, recognizing that the relationships that you create in order to deliver services or create new goods in your organization and ultimately deliver to your customers is often dependent on a series of relationships that are external to you and a recognition that the ecosystem focus has a huge impact on the role that you play in the social enterprise. You also need to think about how you move from a functional siloed approach to a much more symphonic approach, which is an increased level of collaboration. And we firmly believe that the combination of increased engagement as well as increased collaboration takes you from a traditional functional view to a much more symphonic ecosystem view, which ultimately allows you to elevate into the social enterprise. I do want to take a step back and define what we believe a social enterprise is. It's an organization that combines revenue growth and profit making with the need to respect and support its environment and stakeholder network. But it also listens, it invests, and it manages the change that shapes the world today. And ultimately, we believe that an organization that embraces the social enterprise has a responsibility to be a good citizen, a role model, and ultimately promote collaboration. We believe that this is your opportunity and your mission to combine revenue growth, profit making, and the need to respect and support your stakeholders and ultimately the world, if you would, to ultimately deliver improved results. So as you start to think about where we've been in this last year, the social enterprise is here to stay, but we started to decipher an even greater trend in this year's report that based on the responses that beyond moving sort of from functional to symphonic and external ecosystem, there was another big element to what we were hearing from these respondents, and that is a significant shift from purpose to meaning. And it's about engaging with external partners, and it's also about creating higher levels of focus on what it means to benefit the individual. And purpose is something that many organizations have embraced. And that's the good news. Organizations have listened and responded with purpose. But that doesn't really necessarily benefit the individual. So to benefit the individual, we believe there needs to be a significant shift to focusing on meaning. Meaning is what ultimately people inside of organizations are looking for, and meaning is what helps them thrive, and meaning is what makes them feel connected. So what is meaning and why is it important? Well, when you think about the external influences across the economic and political and social aspects, it's important to recognize that there is the rise of the individual, the influx of technology, and ultimately a decline in the trust in government. And we believe that these three influencers and factors are indeed causing a significant rise in the importance of meaning. When you look at the rise of the individual, it has completely changed the way that organizations listen and engage with their stakeholders. The power of individuals to have a voice. And when you think about that, that voice is not something that in today's world is just heard inside the four walls, but can quickly be heard and seen across a host of social media sites and quickly gain traction and support from people all around the world, it forces you to recognize that any individual's voice has risen to a level of importance in any organization, and listening to that and engaging with that is an important factor in your overall success. It's no secret that technology is continuing to change the way that organizations need to collaborate. And no matter where I go and in conversations with our clients, technology has continuously been a part of the what if and how questions that we get. Every organization is trying to figure out how to leverage these new digital technologies, whether it's AI, cognitive, robotics, you name it, to determine ultimately how do we optimize the way that we deliver services to our internal customers or external customers, how do we optimize the way that we do our work, how do we optimize research and development, whatever it might be. But this influx of technology has not only changed the way that organizations need to collaborate, but it does have potential adverse impacts that can ultimately be included in the workplace. So if not cared for and not thought of in terms of how do you use technology side by side with humans, there is indeed a risk. And then a decline in the trust in government. As we look at the Edelman Trust Index over the last couple of years, there's been a significant shift where now organizations trust more in business than they did governments. And when you think back all the way to 2008 and everything that was going on in businesses then, and the need for our governance to get involved and step in to support the sentiment in the world, it has completely shifted in the opposite direction, where the Edelman Trust Index is showing that people are looking for businesses to play a role and actively influence and contribute to some of society's biggest issues. So when you think about these factors and the need to bring meaning back into work, it ultimately demands a new organizational mandate. How do organizations bring meaning back into work? We believe that you do that by reinventing with a human focus. When you reinvent with a human focus, it means that you are foundationally changing the use of technology at the core. So this is not about re-engineering, retooling, or tinkering around the edges. The reinvent and the how is really about a fundamental reinvention of processes, programs, and the way that you use technology. And if you think about the concept of inventing, it's always had some type of technology tied to it. And so our message here isn't focus on the individuals and forget technology. You must absolutely have an emphasis on technology. But technology is what can push the world forward, but you can't do that without thinking about how you do that side by side with your people. When you look at the human part, we believe the human is the why. Focused on the human, not in spite of technology, but because technology is allowing us to focus more on the human skills by creating additional capacity and freedom for you to think about how do you develop and grow human skills inside your organization while the technology takes on some of those activities that used to be done by your people. 2 years ago, we determined that the fourth industrial revolution was not really driving the productivity that we'd expect or seen prior in prior industrial or in prior revolutions. But what we're really focused on now is that it's not just about individuals adopting technology. It's really about how do you take this technology and use it to drive change with individuals that ultimately improves productivity. And so the human is the why here is really how you ultimately improve productivity inside your organizations. And then the focus is the where, that you cannot just focus on HR. As leaders in corporate functions, it's so important that you don't just focus on how to improve the way work gets done inside of your focus areas, but frankly that you also focus on how you as leaders can ultimately create a larger enterprise impact. And what we've seen historically is that it often gets delegated to the HR function because organizations think, well, it's changing processes and how work gets done for our workers, and so HR really needs to own it. But this is really where the symphonic C-suite comes into play, is that we firmly believe that it requires all of the C-suite working together to ultimately deliver the right results. So reinvent with a human focus is an important step for every organization to create new momentum. When we look at the trends this past year, the name of the trends report is Reinvent with a Human Focus. How do you not just recognize the importance of a social enterprise, but now how do you lead in the social enterprise? And there were 3 categories of trends this year: the future of the workforce, the future of the organization, and then ultimately the future of HR. Because we do recognize that HR does play a role and is often the only corporate function, an enabling function, that touches every single employee on a consistent basis. So we do believe that HR has to elevate their role in a way to develop more enterprise outcomes. When you look at the future of the workforce, you really need to consider a few things. Our trends indicate that the future of the workforce is indeed diverse, but it's not just from race or ethnicity, but also diverse in how work can be defined. And that means not just on-balance sheet workers, but also off-balance sheet workers. And how do you start to recognize and acknowledge the alternative workforce? The future of the workforce is also hungry for opportunities to play bigger roles and more expansive roles at work. And I'm going to share with you a concept in a few minutes around the jobs to superjobs transition. And it's also complex. The future of the organization really needs to be experience-focused and focused on bringing meaning back into work and elevating the human experience inside of how you're organized and how you build teams. It needs to be team-oriented and really challenge sort of the traditional hierarchy. And then indeed it needs to be personalized, recognizing that each worker inside your organization has individual needs, and each individual wants to be recognized and rewarded in different ways. And then the future of HR, as I said a second ago, really is a responsibility of the HR organization to help the enterprise access capabilities, not just people, recognizing that not all capabilities might come from people, to figure out how to embed learning into every aspect of day-to-day life, and so that it's not a learning management system, it's a learning experience platform. How do you promote ability as a primary means of development and engagement? And then how do you leverage technology to drive continuous change? So when you think about the best way to respond, the opportunity for you all is to figure out how do you sort of reinvent with a focus on, how do you reinvent with a focus on steps that you can take to refresh, rewire, and recode? Now, refresh is really about updating and improving the way that things happen now. Rewiring is around creating new connections that change the strategic direction. And recode is frankly a signal that we believe that organizations have an opportunity to start over and design from scratch. And you can see on this slide that there's a few areas that we do believe could be refreshed, both on how do you build teams and ultimately how do you do leadership development. We do believe that there's an opportunity to take employee experience to another level called human experience. We do believe that rewards can be much more personalized and individualized. On the rewire, we really believe that the alternative workforce needs a stronger focus, that how you access talent needs to be improved, and then ultimately how you take your HR cloud platforms or on-premise platforms and rewire those to integrate with broader technologies is really important. And I'm going to take a second in just a minute to talk about some super jobs and talent mobility as well. So with the few minutes that I have left, I wanted to share a couple of statistics with you. As you think about the trends report, there are some staggering stats that we learned about this year. So for example, on the alternative workforce, on this slide here it says that we believe you need to rewire. The reason that we believe you need to rewire is because we had 41% of our survey respondents said that the issue is important or very important, but only 8% of our respondents had established processes to actually manage and develop an alternative workforce. Now, the risk with that, from our perspective, is that with the rise of the alternative workforce and the importance of acquiring those capabilities outside of the on-balance sheet employees, we believe that there needs to be an increased focus for all organizations to think about what you can do to access capabilities and talent across the different talent sources that still allows you to meet the needs and deliver on new outcomes for your customers. When you think about the concept of superjobs, which is what we're suggesting as a recoding, what we're finding is that jobs are ultimately being disrupted by technologies like AI and cognitive and robotics, but in reality, jobs are not largely being replaced. So 80% of our respondents indicated that they expect the use of cognitive and AI to increase significantly over the next 3 years, but only 13% believe that automation will eliminate a significant number of positions, and only 26% said that they felt ready or very ready to address technology in the workplace. So instead of displacing human workers, organizations are recognizing that it really is finding ways to design jobs that account for humans and bots working side by side, which is this concept of superjobs. The idea that someone can take a part of their old role combined with a part of another role to create a new superjob to execute work in a completely different way. And then when you start to think about talent mobility, there's always this concept of winning the war on the talent, and internal talent mobility is definitely a topic on the C-suite mind. And our respondents said 76% of them, in fact, said that they rated this as an important or very important topic. Here's the challenge. 46% said that their managers resist the internal mobility. And 56% of the 11,000 plus respondents said that it was easier for people to find a new job outside their organization than try to navigate the internal mobility inside their current organization. And so the message here is why we believe that there's a significant opportunity to recode the way that organizations look at talent mobility is because there appears to be a barrier for that internal movement. And as a result, organizations risk losing significant talent with significant knowledge to competitors or other organizations. So a huge opportunity for every organization to focus on this going forward. And then the last piece I would share with you is on the learning side. I mentioned a minute ago that learning is really all about recode opportunity here. And this is thinking about how do you build learning in the flow of life, more in the day-to-day. 86% of the respondents cited reinventing the way people learn is important, but only 10% said their organizations were very ready to address this subject. And so I'm extremely excited to share with you some ideas around how we can do that during our panel. But I want to be conscious of our time. I wanted to introduce the concept of the social enterprise, talk about the importance of the rise of the individual, the technology, and then ultimately the trust in business over government, and share with you some quick highlights of our 2019 human capital trends. Sincerely appreciate your time and patience as I ran through that for the first 20 minutes. At this time, I'm going to pass it over to Greg Pryor, who is going to lead our panel section of the presentation. Greg?
Hey, thank you so much, Michael. And before I introduce myself, I really want to thank you and your colleagues at Deloitte for this annual perspective. I have to admit, I am an HCM super geek, to use your sort of super jobs. And believe it or not, I do look forward to your report each year. And once again, this year, you did not disappoint. I know you've just taken a couple of minutes to give us a broad overview, and I would absolutely encourage everyone online today to dig into the full report, because you just covered the surface on some great things. And I could not agree more about that we need to absolutely add this social capital lens on top of the human capital lens. So thank you. My name is Greg Pryor, and I have the incredible privilege and pleasure to look after talent at Workday. So I'm a practitioner, like so many of us on the line today, and so many of our great panelists. So I appreciate and think about what Michael has just talked about every day on how we address these, I think, tremendous opportunities. So what I'd like to introduce is invite Michael onto the panel, but also to introduce two other panelists joining us today. Mary, could I ask you to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mary Chan. I am the Vice President of Human Resources for Colliers International. As Colliers International's Human Resource Officer for the Greater Philadelphia region, I specialize in attracting and developing the best talent, building a culture of excellence based on engagement, diversity, and leadership by integrating innovative solutions that utilize technology, data analytics, and emphasis on business growth.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Thanks so much for taking your time out to share some perspective. I'm a big fan of your organization. I appreciate you joining us. And Casey, could I ask you to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Thanks so much, Greg. Casey Conkright. I'm the head of talent and innovation for a company called FAM. We're about a 40-year-old organization headquartered in beautiful, sunny Los Angeles, California, with divisions across apparel, food and beverage, hotel property management, and also the automotive space. So we get around. My team and I are responsible for everything that touches talent, from the moment of first contact and identifying a need all the way through the end of their life cycle journey here at FAM and beyond, and everything in between. So thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, Casey. Thanks so much for joining us. Yes, and more than sunny today. I think we were talking earlier over 100 degrees in beautiful LA. So I've got a couple of questions. Yeah. Love to invite all panelists to think about that. Casey, maybe I could start with you. Can you talk a little bit about how the role of the HR executive has shifted in response to the latest innovation and some of the disruptive technologies that Michael just talked about, especially in the talent space, and maybe where has been a couple of the changes and maybe, sort of the mindset, skill set, tool set that you see in the marketplace for an HR executive such as yourself and your peers?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and Michael always does such a great job, and I love the term that he used as symphonic C-suite. I often call myself a conductor or a director of the band sometimes when it comes to our leadership team, because I tend to be the one, as Michael said, that touches every employee in every life cycle across every part of our business. We're the one unique department that really does that in any organization. And I think that has really just given rise to how much more we do need to be adaptable, experiential from a mindset, and almost from a technology standpoint, gamified. If people are familiar with that term and creating those meaningful experiences, and really removing ourselves a little bit more from that process transactional mindset, especially in the technology framework as we introduce new technologies into businesses, whether it's HR technology or it's e-commerce technology or whatever it may be. To Michael's great points, these are all things that touch people, and we are integral in that process to roll this out. And we see it differently in all parts of our business. In our car dealership business, the employees rarely, if ever, see the technology that impacts their lives. Funny enough, they get little bits and they get little pieces, but it's a very transactional business and it's a very transactional mindset, and it's all about that high customer satisfaction score that they aim for. And that really translates into how they work with me, how they work with my team, and how we have to deliver services back to them, versus e-commerce, which is very technology focused. It's almost start with technology first and then work our way into having to deal with people on basic levels if we need to, but then really leveraging that time that's created for people interaction, to the organizational development, the people development, the skills development, which really feeds into some of those super job concepts and how companies adapt to being able to manage and have super jobs and people taking on different roles within their organization. They're both impactful and meaningful to the end user, but they're different. And that just really goes back to my earlier point about that adaptable, experiential, gamified mindset, is because our workforces are so diverse. We do have super jobs. We do have people across varying different levels within the organization, and now more than ever, it's important that we keep that in mind. And CEOs like mine and other CEOs have really realized how much impact HR has across the breadth of the organization and what we do and how we impact. And this is a time more than ever where we really are able to be those business partners and really help organizations continue to evolve and really not fall back into some of our older habits, which is, if we implement this technology, it's going to solve all of our problems and we'll be able to get rid of this entire workforce because a chatbot is going to take care of our customer service. We know now that doesn't work, and companies that have gone out of business with that mindset know now that it doesn't work, and we're able to really leverage a lot of that history to our benefit. And that's really my thought on this topic. I could probably write another master's thesis on it, which is where my response is going with this one. But I think I'll cut myself off and give Mary a chance to respond.
That's incredible. You're seeing the diversity across the diversity of your business. That HR folks need to understand the context of the business and seeing the diversity even within in your diverse business. That's amazing. Mary, thoughts on where you're seeing shifts in how HR executives need to be prepared and think about the things that Michael just talked about?
Yeah, sure. I think Casey just took all of my words out of my mouth, but I will. I'm going to piggyback off of him and agree and say that the HR executive has become more strategic and agile. We more than ever need to become expert leaders. Not only in HR, but in the business itself. Understanding the business, understanding, the direction and the growth of the company. Having the ability to see 10 years from now and see which way the business is going to go in order to kind of strategize and bring in that technology and along with that human element. So, in our company, I brought in innovation and technology for efficiency purposes. Because in our industry, it's all relationship building. All of our brokers, being in commercial real estate, it's all about building that relationship. So that human element is there, but bringing in the technology and innovation of the technology has really helped efficiency. So technology doesn't really solve all the problems because it can't account for that human, body language reading and bias and all of that. So we definitely have created superjobs in here because with the technology that we've brought in, there still needs to be somebody running the data. There still needs to be somebody reading the data, and there still needs to be somebody who can implement and apply strategies based on the data. So there has to be someone to pull the reports and read the reports. So there's technology doesn't really solve all the problems, and having that human element with the technology, it just equals success.
So I'm going to ask you, fascinating, I'm going to ask you to double click on that. It sounds like, from your perspective, the future of HR is both digital and human. That it's, these two things is sort of how do we automate and elevate the work that we're doing. How are you specifically transforming your team to be more personal, more human, more, intuitive? And how are you using AI and automation to deliver value to the organization? And then, sorry for the compounded question, but how's it impacted the transforming of your team? What does that look like, at Colliers?
So what I've done internally is with our recruiters, for example, I brought in a brand new recruiting system, and it has helped efficiencies in the way that resumes they're not filtering through resumes. It's not a process any longer. They're resumes that are being presented to them are qualified resumes. So they're having, quality conversations with qualified candidates on the phone, and what I encourage my recruiters to do is, I don't want that automation of that rejection to go through the system. I actually want them to, type a letter and print it out, the old school fashioned way, put it in an envelope and send it to them. Same thing with offer letters. Candidates, they don't want to get lost in that weed. They want to have that human element. They want to know that there's somebody behind the technology and that they can just pick up the phone and call or email somebody, and we'll pick up the phone and call them to, I just want our candidates to have a good experience, and that's why, that was an example of one, element that I've changed. The other element is, the whole data analytics, system that I've brought in. It's not only your regular, turnover ratios. You kind of have to get creative, and because of our industry has really shifted in our talent workforce not being in the office. A lot of them are working from home because of technology. A lot of them are working out from our satellite offices. So, we kind of have to change our mindset and change the analytics to kind of show more of metrics that, for example, one of the things we're working on now is measuring work productivity versus time, So we really we're really working on changing our ways and changing our mindset on how to work with today's world.
Yeah, fascinating. Michael, can I ask you to weigh in and maybe build on what Mary was talking about from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. You know, in a client service, professional services firm like Deloitte, you can imagine that our clients always have an expectation of how do we deliver more results faster. And so one of the things that we're doing, frankly, in our own consulting services organization is figuring out how do we leverage AI and cognitive and robotics to change the way that we work and deliver services for our clients that not only allows us to do it faster and often cheaper, but frankly delivers more insights. So, for example, one of the things that we have done more recently is embed digital technologies into the way that we do design sessions. And for any of you on the phone that have ever gone through a project and been through part of design sessions, you can probably appreciate the countless number of workshop designs and the documentation and signing off hundreds of pages and having to review requirements. Well, we've employed digital technologies to capture all of that feedback, process it, and then ultimately spit out insights around consistent themes, missing information, follow-up questions, and then give people the opportunity to engage with digital platforms to address those things immediately, regardless of where they're sitting in the world, and then ultimately allows them to sign off within hours as opposed to within days. Just by doing that, we've improved accuracy, we improved consistency, and we've cut our design time down in half in a lot of the work that we do. And what that's also allowed our people to do, Greg, is now focus on how do they leverage the insights and information coming out of that to ultimately spend more time advising our clients on their choices when they're building new technology platforms. So it's a win-win for everybody.
No, that's fantastic. So again, that super job idea of automating what you can so that you can elevate those natural human, the interaction with the customers, the creative side rather than the number crunching. Fantastic. Hey, Casey, do you have anything that you would add to that?
Well, what I love about Mary and Michael is I can just hit that's easy button on these webinars. To Mary's point, she steals the words right out of my mouth. Definitely the human aspect is still alive. I think to Mary's great point, technology, AI, digital transformation, whatever terms you want to use, it's allowed us to focus on what really matters and create really amazing experiences. It was never meant to replace that. It was meant to enhance it. And I 100% agree with what they've said because that's what it's all about.
Yeah. No, I mean, some fascinating examples of where we're seeing that automation come in and enable humans to do what I think, again, those creative tasks. I'm going to, Casey, ask you to take the lead on this one as well and talk a little bit about how we engage employees and sort of really uphold morale when dealing with some of these activities where, job responsibilities might not have traditionally been brought together. So we hear a lot of, I think, increasing angst from our workforce as we hear about automation, as we hear about the reconfiguration of jobs. I'm wondering what are some of the things that you're doing to give a voice to folks, to let them maybe reduce some of that anxiety, to engage them, in the dialogue as we go through some of these transformations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking about this, and to use the term super job, I think we have more super jobs at this company and internally more than any other company I've ever worked at, more than I can count. And, while we're nimbler, because of it, one of the things that we can never lose, sight of is who and what is making it work. And the who are the people. The what is quite often, technology or nimble processes, whatever it may be. I think when it comes to new hires, that's a little bit easier, because we really do emphasize the communication up front. Everyone gets their own coffee. Everyone makes their own files. One day, you're down at a new company that we acquired helping to clear out a warehouse, and the next day you're setting a digital marketing strategy. No job too big or too small, and, no one is better than, any job that's available. But that does also, create some issues. Internally, And we really do try to provide a lot of different formats. Sometimes it's formal, sometimes it's informal. Sometimes it's private, public, it's confidential opportunities. And our focus is really, making sure that people are being heard and emphasizing how their work matters, that their work matters, why their work matters, what their contributions mean, not just to the development of themselves and their team, but also the company. People like to know, where they fit into the larger picture. And then once they have that voice, we can then focus on, something that was mentioned earlier in terms of the right combination of praise, financial, non-financial compensation, activities, opportunities, what the individual best responds to, going back to the experiential, the gamified, kind of moving away from the one size, fits all. Some of these things that technology has done really well in enabling us, to do. And then sometimes, HR, talent, whatever term, you want to use, we also have to be the ones that draw a line in the sand and, help the organization realize that we've also gone too far in combining jobs. Everybody thinks a super job is cool, or, changing the nature of how we work is cool, but, sometimes that can go to the dark side of the force really, really fast. And, our job is to really, help increase that morale, help people realize, the better nature of themselves, not just the employees, but the executive team that may be making some of these decisions. Just because it has worked well doesn't mean it always will work well. And that's where we can, really help the organization, again, continue to grow and continue to create those meaningful experiences like, Mary talked earlier just with the talent acquisition work that they do.
No, that's super cool, making sure people are feeling heard, making sure that you've got your finger on the pulse of where are we enabling, where are we maybe going too far. Mary, can you talk a little bit about how some of the things you're doing to sort of engage, to listen and uphold the employee experience as we go through this digital transformation?
Yeah, sure. So what we did was we did the same thing. We listened to the voices of our frontline employees by sending out surveys, the survey engagements. And from there, we implemented change. But it wasn't a one-size-fits-all like Casey mentioned earlier. Ours was more, we went on a personal level and, provided them with, within reason, their, kind of met their needs, basically. See, with us in our organization, we have a dynamic going on where we need the tenured people here because they have the institutional knowledge, and we also need the younger millennials and Gen Zs coming in because they have the technology piece of it. So what we've decided to do internally is we've built a team, and this wasn't something that was implemented from executive down. This was implemented from hearing the voices of everyone in the organization, because it was a lot of change going on in our organization with bringing in all this innovation and technology, where our tenured employees began to panic, and they saw us, recruiting and bringing in a lot of younger people, and they felt like they were going to get pushed out, and that wasn't the case. So what we did was we built teams. We matched up the millennials with the baby boomers, and we, matched them up, and it's so far, knock on wood, it is going great. But as far as the morale goes in general, if you give your employees a voice and you genuinely try to make that change, listening to them because they are in the front line, the morale, of course, along with increased benefits and, happy hours, all that human element of the benefits as well goes along with it. That relationship building, all of that increases morale.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. In fact, and not that we suggest that anyone else do that, but to your point on that consistent listening at Workday, we happen to survey our entire company every Friday. Every Friday is what we call Feedback Friday, and on the surface that may sound like it's overwhelming. I'm often asked about survey fatigue, but we happen to use 34 of the Great Place to Work 56 questions, and we pulse 2 a week. And so every 17 weeks we pulse 34 questions, and we have a chance to do what we call sort of a culture sprint. So we are understanding, sharing, and then responding to that. In fact, I'm in our Atlanta office today and was in many of our European offices last week, and we're just sharing those results out. We're engaging people. And what I find striking to me is that each office is different. I was in Oslo and Madrid and now in Atlanta. And while the general employee experience is the same, each office has a little something different to work on. And we're using, the machine learning technology to really pull out specific things. Are women and men having the same experience around decision making? Are they feeling similarly around promotion? Or are millennials and our baby boomers, having a similar experience around being connected? And I couldn't agree with you more. Understanding and then responding and then engaging, the workforce and using this technology to then show up in a human form and engage in a dialogue is, I think, to Michael's point, where the world is going. So let me maybe take this a bit further. We've been talking about this sort of super job mentality, but maybe, Michael, I'll ask you to take the lead. Can you give examples of learning and approaches between sort of boomers and millennial generations when adopting this super job mentality? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll set it up by just saying that there is a significant recognition as we engage with our clients and we even look at the survey results, which I should have mentioned. The survey results includes business leaders as well as HR leaders. So it's not just an HR-centric view. There's a significant knowledge or recognition that there's knowledge that exists inside the baby boomers that organizations don't want to lose. And so what they're doing is they're focused on 3 things. Number 1, how do they retain that knowledge? Number 2, how do they have the different generational workers work side by side together? And number 3, how do they create super jobs that combine knowledge and experiences that people have in the younger generation alongside the baby boomers? On the first one, on retaining the knowledge, in the alternative workforce mindset, many more organizations are developing ways for retirees and alumni to come back in sponsorship and mentorship programs on a part-time basis. And they're having huge upside because it allows for the knowledge to continue and be embedded in the organization. On the combination of hybrid working side by side, when we talk about the networks of teams and building teams to solve specific business issues or projects, a lot of times organizations look at who they have today on the balance sheet, and many more organizations in building their teams are establishing advisory boards and external advisors that include alumni and retirees, so that not only are you building networks of teams with people inside your organization today, but also considering what knowledge or capabilities did we have when we did something similar or accomplish something successfully, and do we want those same things in our future? So they're now part of the team working side by side. And then third, on the super jobs, because I talked about the possibility of part-time work for the baby boomers or the retirees, and it's not full-time. What they're doing is they're transferring that knowledge to the younger generation, the workers that are on the balance sheet. And part of the time it's being delivered by the baby boomers, and then the other part of the time it becomes a super job as an additional responsibility for the people that are on the balance sheet already to perform those tasks, thereby improving the work that they're doing alongside of some of the other stuff that they've already been responsible for. So those are some moves that we're seeing organizations make when, frankly, having a really high return.
No, that's great. And it was interesting. I was actually in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago with one of our largest and most successful sort of customers in Europe, and they are, to your point, they are a very, very large, very forward-looking, successful organization, and they're breaking down all of those barriers. They're not thinking about employees versus contracts versus consultants. They're thinking about this broader liquid workforce and what are the skills and capabilities that they can match relative to work. And it just seems that they seem to be so unleashed in a positive way and unconstrained as they started to take some of those barriers off. Mary, maybe I could ask you. I know you gave us some examples of your match-up program where you're matching up baby boomers and millennials. I'm not sure if you're leaving the Gen Xers out completely. I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm sensitive to that. But what else? Is there anything else you would add? I know you're not. But I don't feel left out. We're the lost generation. So other things you would share?
Yes. So I would say that our Gen X, in our organization, I don't know what everyone else is saying, but the Gen X in our organization are the superstars. They are the tie between the baby boomers and the millennials. So what's happening is when we're teaming up, we are looking at talent, and we are looking at where one person is weak, we're teaming up with another person that's strong. And what we're finding is when it comes to the Gen X, we'll throw them into the mix of a team if we see issues of communication between the baby boomers and the millennials, because the Gen X person is there to kind of tie that gap because they can understand. So I'm Gen X. So a lot of people who are in the C-suite, which I have the blessing of sitting in the C-suite at the table. A lot of people who are in the C-suite in my organization are the older generation. So a lot of our younger generation, they can't really relate. They have two different worlds. They work in different silos. So my job from a Gen X perspective is to bridge that gap and help that communication barrier, because I part of me understands baby boomers, and I understand their word, and I understand how they're conducting business, but there's a lot of part of me that I am a millennial as well, so knowing that's how I'm building our teams, and how we're fitting in the Gen X into the team.
That makes total sense to me. I do. I think we're sort of a generation of bridgers, right? You can understand, and you have the context for the boomers and how they grew up, but also understand and see how the millennial point of view and the technology that they brought up and come up with perspectives and solutions, much the way we're talking about. No, that's brilliant. Hey, Casey, any thoughts on this before we go to our last question and then on to some questions from the audience? Thoughts on superjob mentality and what you're doing?
Yeah, no, I think it's great thoughts. I was really reflecting last night on, boomers and millennials and, how they learn and what they learn. And, I was thinking about, where my role, fits into a little bit of the point Mary was hitting on is sometimes I'm the translator. I help the boomers figure out how to transfer their knowledge to millennials, which are a different generation and started off differently, how to help millennials also back transfer knowledge to boomers in different ways and how they accept that knowledge and teaching. And then I was realizing, what role does Gen X really play? And then I realized I was Gen X and figured out the answer to my own question. I think I'm a translator. And helping both sides figure out how each side is motivated, because the why and the how and the what of the motivation and the willingness to learn and the willingness to adapt is very different, I think, between the two.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So what we'll do, we've got about 5 minutes for this last question, and Casey, I would ask you to take the lead on this. What combination of capabilities and skill sets are you looking at when you're recruiting or when you're thinking about moving talent? What sort of shifts are you seeing in the workforce or anticipating? And how are you preparing for that by thinking about different skills and capabilities for a future workforce?
Yeah, I think when it comes to, the external versus internal, strategies of, where we get talent from, one, it's the focus on, the new hire onboarding aspect, whether they're already an employee or they're a brand new employee, they're still going to a new job, even if it's in the same, department. And, are we finding the right people that are willingly able to, transfer knowledge and receive knowledge? I think where we've seen the most struggles are people that are like, oh, I'm going to kind of keep it to myself so that I stay valuable. Our most valuable employees are the ones that make themselves replaceable in one way, shape, or form, because those are the people that we want to have, around, the people that are focused on making sure the business continues. And then even the differences between the businesses, from the lot porter or car washer to a VP of marketing to a production associate, we want people that are going to be the best at what they do and realize where they want to go, whether it's be in that role until they retire or transition into new roles internally or externally, to the organization. But one place, we have struggled, a little bit, which I think, we've overcome, but the mindset is always there because it's conditioned of how some of us think is, sometimes when we're looking for new talent, especially in the context of super jobs and needing people that have, such a diverse skill set that aren't homegrown, is that we have to be okay hiring people that have had 5 jobs in 5 years. Or 5 jobs in 3 years, because sometimes that's the only way that you get that mindset, and you really have to go a lot deeper into the psychology of, talent acquisition and understand, what has made you go to these different jobs. Is it because they can't handle having super employees and super jobs? Is it because they weren't ready for them? Is it because they weren't focused on, the person's next step? And I think that more than anything is a lot of struggles, is the biggest struggle that any organization today is facing as they incorporate more of these super jobs is, really being okay with hiring the people externally, because if you look at your super employees internally, they have also had 5 or more jobs in 5 years. It's just been internally. You don't notice it. And it's a big mindset shift, and it's where, sometimes we Gen Xers and, boomers are like, but I've been in the same job for 3 or more years. Or in the case of some boomers, I've been here for 20 years. What do you mean you've had 5 jobs in 5 years? How is that helpful? And it does create challenges sometimes.
No, I hear you on that. Mary, anything you would add to when you think about recruiting and talent mobility? What are some of the capabilities and skill sets that you're looking for as we shift to some of the new worlds of work that Michael talked about?
Yes. So, so to piggyback off of Casey's statements, what I've found is that a lot of Gen Xers and millennials, their main focus is career building. They are here for the experience, and sometimes it's a good thing because they're going to go above and beyond to prove themselves and to build that career resume. And that's why, in my opinion, I see this shift of 2 to 3 years in the job market. So we're okay with hiring younger millennials or people who have that 2 to 3 year gap, but depending, on the situation. But what we really look for are people who have that entrepreneurial mindset, somebody who takes ownership of their job, somebody who's a quick thinker, who's resourceful and kind of, tech savvy. The reason why we're looking for these candidates is because of the innovation that we've brought into our world, and we're trying to combine that with our tenured baby boomers that has been here for over 10 years and over 15 years. So we're just trying to combine that match. So the reason why we're looking for that is because our clients have changed in this technology world, So the way we do business years ago is not the same way business is done today. And so the baby boomers and our industry are, finding out that they need things at their fingertips, because clients call and they want something. You have to be able to get them that information right away. And teaming up with that younger generation it's really working out great for us.
Oh, that's great. Well, maybe I'll to bring it back before we go to the audience Q&A, back to Michael's opening comment. Maybe, at least for us at Workday, what we're thinking about is, and what we're actually doing is helping people understand the skills to transition more quickly onto new teams or to come into the organization. So as both, Mary, you and Casey talked about, the frequency by which people will be changing roles, we see has been accelerating, has been increasing. And so one sort of maybe perspective that we at Workday are doing is to say, if this is the way the world is going, if we're going to be moving to more agile organizations, what we've done, again, inspired by the good work that Deloitte and the work they're doing, is actually teaching people how to connect to the social network, how to understand that the density and the positivity of their relationships are actually central to their success. And if we can help them accelerate or move faster onto those teams, we believe that that's going to ultimately enable some of the productivity that that Michael and the report talked about. So I would maybe leave this section with a last thought, that I actually think one of the capabilities that people need to build is the ability to accelerate their transitions. And there are some really specific things that we've learned that people can do to be a fast mover onto a team and to accelerate the trust and the capability that they're building to be productive faster. So maybe we'll use that as the last thought on our panel discussion. Gosh, thank you, Michael and Mary and Casey, for your discussions. I will turn it back over to Alex for some audience questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you to the panelists. You guys had a great discussion, and Greg, great job moderating. So as Greg had just mentioned, we are now going to review some of the questions that were submitted by the audience during the discussion. So the first question that we have is, how do you balance the importance of the human aspect with the cost associated with having that human element? How have you influenced C-suite on that value? So does anyone want to head up this question first?
I would like to say, value proposition, but you also have to see, it's difficult from an HR perspective. If you have, the CEO and the C-suite, backing you up, you should be able to, they would trust you, and you should be able to, present the value proposition, fairly easily. But if you don't, I really don't have a strategy for that, because I personally won't work for an organization that don't see, what's the right word? Growth and moving forward.
Okay, great, perfect. Does anyone else want to weigh in or follow up from Mary?
Yeah,
this is Mike.
I was just going to say.
Go ahead, Casey.
I was just going to say, 100%, agree. And to Mary's point about, what organizations do we want to, work for, I always think that, I'm very fortunate today, because the first words out of my CEO's mouth aren't what's the cost, it's what's the value proposition, what's the value to the organization. And it's not, a mutually exclusive technology or people or cost or people or this or that conversation. It's, what's the long-term value. I think when we get into cost and either or type conversations, then it becomes a much more short-term solution, which tends to create our, long-term problems. Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, I was just going to share a quick phrase that our research shows that organizations or senior leaders are twice as likely to avoid a risk than they are to seek a benefit. And so I think that the opportunity for all of you is to speak in the language of risk, of not doing it. And I love the value statement as well, which is what additional value can it bring beyond sort of efficiency and effectiveness and cost, and that's really where we think productivity has a huge upside and the retention of top talent.
Okay, great, perfect. Greg, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
I think that just the thing, and this is exactly what's been talked about so far, is I do think the reality is there are lots of things that machines do well. Some of the things that, that Mary talked about earlier, screening resumes, a perfect thing that machines and AI and machine learning are really built to do well. I think about in the context of a Workday, we use a lot of machine learning and automation and analytics to understand our employee experience. And then at the end of the day, to give that to a people leader and say, you're the one who has to create a meaningful relationship, to bring the meaning that Michael talked about. And so I still think there's an absolute ton of work that only humans can do and that humans do much better than machines. And so I think it's a both and. I think, unfortunately, we're making too much of an issue, not here on this panel, but in the world, around saying all jobs will go away. I think we're far away from that. And where we can augment and enable people to do what naturally humans can do better, those things around creativity, around new ideas, around helping people feel looked after and supported. There's a lot of really important and good work to be done, and I think it's as you talk about in the superjobs, it's a both and.
Okay, great, perfect. I think that is actually an excellent segue into our next question here. So speaking of AI and automation, would you guys like to go a little bit in depth on how it is specifically affecting the management of a multi-generational workforce? And then kind of tying into, Greg, what you just said, how do you properly communicate the mindset of automation and AI are meant to enhance a role and not replace jobs to your employees? Anyone want to take this one first?
Well, I'll add a point. I'll pick up the back end just on a quick comment to say that it's not, in my opinion, too different than what we were just talking about in terms of how to communicate and build support and alignment with the executives, which is that you have to speak in the language of value. And if I don't know many employees that if we were to go to them and say, look, we're going to leverage technology that ultimately helps you do your job more effectively, improves your productivity, and oh, by the way, develops a whole set of insights for you based on data analysis that usually takes you 4 days to do that we can get to you in an hour, that then frees up your time to be more strategic for the customers that you're serving internally or externally. I think if I was sitting in a room with 100 employees on a floor, I'd say, who's in? I think all of them would raise their hand. So I really think that it's important to speak about the value that technology can bring, and that it's not about replacement, it's about improving how they actually do their work.
I can speak on, when we first brought in the whole tech innovation in our organization, change management was high priority for me because, a lot of baby boomers were complaining, they're not used to it. They don't understand it, and baby boomers they don't learn by telling them. They learn by hands-on. So, it took a lot of time, but they saw, we were patient with them. We let them slowly incorporate the technology in. We allowed them to kind of shift little by little, gave them pointers on, okay, this is what you're used to. Let's try it this way. Take this off the task and put it into the technology, little by little, having weekly meetings, making sure that one-on-one is there with our IT team. IT team had to become experts as well during this phase. Our HR people, our younger HR people had to become technology experts as well. And, that's how we are doing it. We have some baby boomers now who are very advanced. They have moved, not as advanced as millennials, but I'm very proud of them. They've come forward. We have some that we're still working on. So it's still a transition in our organization.
Okay,
and I agree.
Great, perfect.
That change management. I would say that change management piece is super critical. Helping people understand the why, the how, the what, and guiding them through that process in a way that's meaningful. I love, Mary, that you talked about boomers. Even Gen Xers like me. We love to be shown. We love to be walked through. We like to be hands-on. We like to understand. The one thing I love about millennials is a lot of times they'll try to see what they can break and learn in the process. And one of the mistakes we all make with technology sometimes is a lot of us have a collective and historical fear because we did see our parents, our grandparents, or ourselves get displaced by technology, or in the HR technology space, we heard salespeople over and over again say, "Oh, well, tell your CFO and your CEO that you can lay off half your workforce in HR because this technology will replace them." So I still think we're overcoming some of that fear as well, which is why it's so much more critical today with all the new technology that's coming out, especially AI and what people think it is, to be super hyper vigilant on the change management and education side, and then it's meant to enhance.
Okay, perfect. Does anyone else have anything to add for that question? Okay, great. So I think we have one more quick minute here, so we'll have one last question before we wrap up. So real quickly, does anyone have anything to add on how do you satisfy the desire for career building for the younger generations? Anyone want to head this one?
This is Craig. I'll just throw an idea out there and then happy for others to react to it. I think, and Mary talked about it, and we've all talked about it, I do think the fundamental shift moving forward, for all the reasons we just talked about, is a fundamental shift over to career experiences. That, when you look at Teresa Mobley's work at Harvard, when you look at, I think, some of the interesting things that Tammy Erickson has done at the London Business School, Michael and team have been talking about this at Deloitte for years now, the shift from sort of promotion to ongoing progress. And I think that's going to be the fuel that people know that jobs and work are changing. And in order to remain relevant, what people are going to have is these sets of career experiences that build the capabilities we've just talked about. I personally believe that capabilities are the new career currency. And the ability to say, I've had this experience, using Casey's idea of sort of a gameful mindset at work, I've leveled up on this particular capability. I think that that's a future paradigm rather than this historic career path and promotion, which I just personally don't think is as relevant as it was, 10 or 20 years ago, given all the, good insights that Michael shared up front.
Okay.
And this is Casey.
All right, perfect.
One thing I'll just add, one thought I agree with everything, Greg just said, but, I know for here at FAM, we also incorporate two very formal practices in this regard. One is part of our team workshops that we do alongside our annual employee engagement survey that's so important to us, because that does identify opportunities for people to work, and stretch themselves outside of their current job and work on cross-functional teams in terms of corporate or department-wide initiatives that we identify. And the other piece of it, going back to what we've all said about listening and hearing your employees, is It's actually a very intentional question on our quote-unquote formal performance review. We still do that a little bit here, and really asking the person, what are the one or two skills or departments that you would like a stretch project in, over the course of, the next year, and we have very intentional conversations about, is that feasible? If it's not feasible, what else, what else might be available? So sometimes, you have to be very intentional in this regard and, hope that it doesn't just happen, through osmosis.
Okay, all right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, guys. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. So I want to thank Michael, Greg, Mary, and Casey. Thank you guys again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone who attended for joining us today as well for this fantastic virtual event. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.
Thank you.